As quilters, most of us have some fabric on hand. Maybe it's some stash fabric or scrap fabric, orphan block, something left over from before, or maybe it's some fabric we just purchased. Whatever the case may be, there's fabric that needs to be used, and we need to use it but want to make an easy quilt. Have you ever wondered how to put all that fabric together and make an easy quilt? Well, I have some unique ideas, some designs that we can use with charm squares that will be the perfect solution. And you don't have to have charm squares, because remember, you can cut your own 5-inch squares from your fabric. I'm Lea Louise from Inspired Quilting by Lea Louise, and I want to show you some creative variations, and we're going to stack some charm squares 3 different ways, and you're going to love these quilts. They are easy to make, and it's perfect for any kind of a scrappy design that you want. So sit back and relax and get ready, because you're going to have some quilting to do very soon. The first step is we're going to combine our squares and sew them together. Step 1, let's get our pairs matched up and sew a 1/4 inch seam down both sides. And then the next step is to cut this in half. So it's a 5-inch square. We are going to cut it right at 2.5 inches. So we're just going to take each pair, add one of these narrower strips, do a 1/4 inch seam, and there you have it. Now you'll notice what we have here is a rectangle, but in order to make the rail fence block work, we need to create a square. And so by adding a rail on this side, which is where it gets its name, the asymmetrical rail fence, then we have our square, and that's going to create the rail throughout our quilt. And by using a strong contrast like we are here with white, the rail is going to be very dominant. You can certainly choose, maybe you do a navy blue or you do a green. If you don't have the rail in a continuous color, it's not going to be very prevalent, very visible. It'll be more of like a scrappy quilt, which is fine, but you're not going to get that prominent rail look, that pattern that we're going for. Here's a quick reference tutorial page for making these charm square rail fence blocks. Just in case you want to get back to it and don't remember what the details are, there's a link down below in the description, and you can download this for future reference or just save it on your computer. But either way, I hope you enjoy making these. With these blocks sewn together, our quilt is really starting to take shape. Can you see how this pattern is going? I need to put this in the right direction. Then when you press, all of them are going to be pressed to the white stripe so that we eliminate any bulk on this seam here for when we're quilting. Now you can see that we're getting the beginning of what our rail fence is going to look like. So it's the white rail, and we're going to do 4 blocks like this. So when the next block comes over here, see how this just continues. So at this point, we want to make 4 stacks, 4 piles of your fabric. What I prefer doing is creating a 4 patch, because I can always tell that my pattern is correct. Every block will look exactly the same, and if something doesn't look right, I'm going to catch it before I'm putting the final quilt top together. And for me, that's a time saver. It double checks. It helps me look for mistakes ahead of time before it happens, before it's too late to try and change the piece around. Because once the quilt top is made, it's not easy to go back and just flip one block. So let me show you what it's going to look like. Here's your finished block. The first thing you're going to do is sew a seam here and here, and then put those 2 together. So this seam is sewn first, then this seam, and then you put the 2 together and do a long seam across. This 4-patch method really solves a lot of the problems that we can be facing as we're putting this quilt top together. There's a lot of colors to be balancing, a lot of colors to be working with, and putting this 4-patch together is going to make your life a whole lot easier. So take this, divide them into 4 stacks, kind of balance them by color. That way you're going to be less apt to sew two reds or two bright yellows in one block. Not that that's a problem, but I'd rather have some of the yellows and reds throughout the whole quilt top than maybe stuck up in one corner. And that's more what I look for when I'm putting a quilt top together. With your 4 patch blocks completed, now just lay them out in a manner that you like and see that rail fence just jump right out at you. Isn't it beautiful the way it lays out together? Let me show you one other picture of this quilt. Here's a close-up of the quilt finished, hanging on the wall and just sort of draped and flowy. I think it looks beautiful. I love all those colors together, and they make such a great contrast and a beautiful bright quilt that everyone will love. Here are both quilts side by side. The baby quilt, you can see, has the rail fence, the split rail, that is the most common design for rail fences. But this also then has the offset lateral. And I love the way that these blocks lay out. It just gives such a different look to the quilt. This is exactly the same block, this block and this block, and it's just a matter of how you lay it out. So next time you're working on a rail fence, give a little thought about another way you might be able to lay it out and like it better. I don't want to do the same layout. I don't want to have the same diagonal zigzag. So I was thinking about perhaps doing the cross, which is very popular, and doing something like this, and then you would repeatedly have these white crosses across the quilt. And I thought that would be kind of interesting, but I didn't want a cluster of white in the center. So when this was like this, I was kind of looking and I saw, well, how about horizontals? Can I do a horizontal? And, you know, if you do something like this, you're matching up seams, and I don't want to do that. And I thought, well, how about if we turn these and then we have some horizontals that don't have to match up. Let's see, where am I going here? Well, this is to go this way. And this would be kind of fun. So what we have is these, the white rail is down, the white rail is up. See, this is a down and this is an up. So this would be a very easy pattern to sew, and there's no matching seams. Like, you know, if we had done something like this and put all those together, and that's a bit fussier than I care to go with. And then, you know, I didn't like that nearly as much. I like this offset. You know, I love my asymmetrical. I don't want things, you know, all perfectly lined up. I want things square, and I want my corners to match, but I don't want to have necessarily lots of straight perpendicular lines that just sort of detract from the design of the quilt. So this is where I was going, but then I thought, ooh, you know what I might like even better is to do it horizontally. I like the idea of the long lines, because this quilt is going to be 10 blocks wide and 12 blocks long. So that means I would have the white rail going vertically with the length of the quilt, and I think that would really be stunning. And again, we don't have the matching seams, just these corners, which we would have anyways. I think this is the way I'm going to go. So I'm kind of excited to give this a try. So I have all the rows chain stitched, and I just couldn't wait to show you how these look. I love how these blocks go together. The vertical offset rails looks great. The colors are all wonderful, and they just make such an impact together as a group. There's nothing in particular that jumps out and says, hey, look at me. Instead, it's just all this great wash of color, and I love it. So the next step is to get all the seams together, but I started on a couple, and this is what I wanted to show you. I just think this looks wonderful. Now, you see the points, the what do I want to say, the squares where they join up, all these seams, everything's laying out great. So this is going together very well. I'm happy with that. Again, the colors are working well. I love washes of, you know, the blues and greens, and then we get into some purples, and purple and green works well, as does with a lime kind of chartreusey color. Oh, it's fun. This is a fun quilt to look at, and I am excited to get it finished. So let me take it back to the sewing machine, and I'll show you when it's all complete. Take a look at the finished quilt. Oh, it's so pretty. I love the layout of the vertical lines being offset and all those colors blended together. It looks wonderful. And then draped over the side out there. Oh my goodness, this is a fabulous quilt. I love how it turned out. These have a lot of the same fabrics. The larger lap quilt is intended like for mom, so it has more pinks. And the baby quilt I wanted to be sort of less pink. So the baby quilt has the split rail, and the mom quilt, the lap quilt, has the horizontal rail. So the quilts really go well together. They match. They're a great duo. The fabrics work well together, but it's a different pattern. So it changes it up a bit, and it just adds some really nice contrast in how the pattern looks. So I just want you to understand that you have so many opportunities with the fabrics that you already have. There's so many different ways you can use this pattern and come up with different quilts that are going to look very distinctive from each other, and yet at the same time you can also make them match. So think about the fabrics you have and what you can incorporate together in order to create some fun quilts that folks are going to love, whether you gift them, whether you donate them, whether you keep them. Just make quilts. You've got fabric, and we need to use them. So I'm going to take you one step further to the next rail fence. Oh, I think you're going to love this. Here's a pile of fabric I need to use. Most of these here are leftover from quilts that I've made in the last couple months. If you've seen me cut my fat quarters for quilting size pieces into precuts, 5-inch and 10-inch squares, you'll know that along the top, after I cut my 15-inch, then I've got this 3-inch strip. So I have this 3-inch strip from many different fat quarters. So I have a great selection of different fabrics. These are 2.5-inch strips that are left over. Most of them I've also cut. I generally don't buy the 2.5-inch strip rolls just because I get so many out of my own fabrics and what's left over when I cut. These were extra pieces that have either a 5-inch or 10-inch square worth of fabric, and I'll cut those first, and then from there I'll see if there's any 2.5-inch strips I can cut. I know I'm going to work with 10-inch strips by 2.5. So that kind of gives me a plan of where I'm headed. When you have a lot of different quilts like this, a lot of different prints in one quilt, you want to find a background that's going to work well for you. And white is a go-to. It works very well with just about anything. It creates a good strong contrast. Cream is another one. Tone on tone, white or cream works great. I was going to say gray also can be a good one, but it's going to darken your quilt a little. But recently I did a quilt where I had a pale pink and yellow pastel background, and that worked out really well. So I'm going to look for a fabric that might work here that will create a different color. I don't know if I have it on hand. If not, I have plenty of white on white fabrics that I can use. So that's where I'm headed right now. The first thing is to cut my 2.5-inch strips and get the 2.5-inch strips out of these pieces. That takes care of a lot of the clutter that I have laying around that I need to clean up. I have a number of different strips here, and I divided them by color. These are all the 2.5-inch. Some are only 10-inch long, some are the full width of fabric. It depended on what fabric I was cutting from. This is a great quilt to clear house with, to clean everything out and to incorporate a lot of different fabrics, and I think it's a lot of fun. It's going to be bright, it's going to be colorful, and it's a really fun pattern that's going to stand out and create some great contrast. So let me get started. I'll get a block going, get it put together, show you what it's going to look like, and then we'll take it from there. There are a couple different options that we can look at on sizes, etc., and we'll see where it takes us. So let's get started. I'm ready to quilt. Step 1 is finished. I've sewn all my strips together into pairs. Eventually I'll have 3 strips in each unit, but for now I've just taken my longer strips, put shorter strips to the front, and I just chain stitched a bunch of them and went through and just joined them up along the way, and then I'll come back and trim them down to my 10-inch pieces that I need, and then whatever's left will go in the scrap pile. It'll be used for something else. So you can see I just mixed all kinds of colors together, and then I came in and I cut it down to my 10-inch. So now the next step will be to add that third rail. This is what it'll look like, and then with this piece we're going to add our other block on the bottom, and this is what's going to create the rail pattern in the quilt. I think it's going to look wonderful. I'm really excited about it. I like how it's coming together. Once all 3 are together, press the seams all to one side, and then we'll get started putting these background, and we'll be ready to piece our quilt. Now I did take all those neutrals and set them aside, and I'm going to use this as like a low volume background. I think because most of them have cream or white as their background that they're going to work out well, because most of these are all really saturated colors. They've got some real dark, bold colors. I mean, some of them are bright, and it's just that they are, you know, full of color. So they're going to stand out well against these kind of a background. And I think that's going to work out perfectly. So step 1 is to sew the strips together. Step 2 is, once they're cut into 10-inch pieces, add a third strip, then we're going to press them, and then we're going to add that last row, and we're ready to put our quilt together. This has been a lot of fun so far. I love working with lots of different fabrics. So after sewing all my pairs of strips together, I cut them down to the 10-inch piece. And then I went to the extra 2.5-inch strips that I had to add that extra third rail. So now we have a 3-piece strip. Now, as I'm cutting these originally, you saw the big pile of all the pairs of strips that I had sewn together. When I cut my 10 inches out, there were some extra lengths. And I knew going into it that it was going to be that way, but for me, it worked better to just sew a whole bunch of it together and cut out what I need, and then the rest will go on the scrap pile. And I'm going to show you why that works well for me. So these are cut from sewn pieces, and these were cut from the ends that didn't get sewn to anything. Now, you've seen that I use this block a lot, and it comes from this strip. So right here, I have my 2 charm strips, then I add the third, and these I generally use charm squares to create this. So everything's cut down to the 5-inch width, and then I've got plenty more of these. So this has worked out really well for me. So these are going to be set aside into the partially made pile, and that's going to work out great. These are the only pieces out of all those strips that I sewed that I'm not going to be able to use simply because they were too short. So I'm putting these aside for another project that we'll work on later. What I want to show you is how we get to the next step. And it's this piece here. And you saw I had set aside some neutral fabrics. And I say neutral in that the background is neutral. They're white, they're cream, off-white, pastels, and that works really well against these bold colors. So this can work here and still stand out well enough to create a pattern. And so that's what I used. And then you'd begin by sewing these end to end. And I want to show you an example of that. And here we go. So these strips have all been sewn together. And you can see, here's the strip there. There's the second strip. And I just chain stripped them. And I sewed this one. I put one here. I put one here. And I did this all the way through. Now, this is just a quick and easy way to get the strips sewn. This quilt, generally at this point, we would come through and just sew these rows, but we're not going to on this because we want to flip this around. I want the pattern to be offset like this. Now, two things. Number one, it adds more interest to have that step apart, but that's half the seams you have to match. If we kept it this way, you would have to match this seam and this one. By offsetting them, you just have one seam, and it's going to go so much more quickly. So what we do instead is we sew all these together, and then we come back and we cut them apart and flip them around. Now check this out. Look at that. Isn't that just such fun and easy? So that's how this goes together. And put this together this way and nest that seam, line it up, and then you've got this great pattern coming out. And I love it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So now let me show you what it looks like finished. And it's fun to see all the different prints, all the colors coming together. And of course I keep lots of blues and greens because that is my favorite. And because these blues and greens have other colors, it ties it all together, I think, really well. And then these low volumes work perfectly because look at how well that rail stands out. I think it looks great. And there's a lot of interest in those rails, not just the fabrics. One of my favorite batiks is this sunflower, and it's in so many different colors. And so that's where we are. I wanted you to see this finished quilt and how wonderful it looks and how much fun, and think of all the fabrics that you have set aside that you can pull out and create this fabulous quilt yourself. It doesn't take long. It's a quick one. Like I said, large blocks, goes quickly, and makes a large quilt. Here's a look at a pair of the elongated rails, the 10-inch rails with low volume. Now, this is the low volume that you saw that I demonstrated that had the white background on these rails, and notice how great that looks with that horizontal line that the rails develop. This one was done more with yellow and gold, and it just sort of fit with the blocks I was using. You'll notice that a lot of these have sort of golden yellow highlights to them, and this just worked out perfectly. This pair is terrific, and it's another one you really ought to try. It's a great way to use up all those extra strips that you have. Here's the quilt that we made with the asymmetrical rail fence block, and the distinctive design to this quilt is the zigzag rail pattern that is created by this narrow 1/8" strip. There's a couple other I want to show you. Let's look at this one first. This is the same asymmetrical block. If you look at this, see, this is right there. Okay, we've got the 3 and we have the narrow. The difference is this rail, I just took all kinds of turquoise fabrics. So it's not as dominant of a rail fence design pattern that we would expect with a strong contrast. But what I wanted to do is just create some nice all over color with some bright, some pinks and some yellows and just some other fun colors, and really carry this blue and turquoise throughout the quilt. Now, even though it's in the rail, I also put it within the strip sets. So the blue and turquoise is everywhere, and that was sort of my dominant color, which was intentional. So this is another way you can do this same pattern. Now it's laid out exactly as the previous one. It's alternating like this, and because this side rail is not such a stark contrast, we get a totally different look in our quilt. Insert a video of the picture for the turquoise rail fence. Now here's another rail fence that's a lot of fun, and I did it not unlike the jelly roll. Let's see, where are these two? Right here. So I would take my 3-inch strips, and again, I don't want the same combination repeated frequently, so what I would do is I would cut them into I don't know, these were like 4 or 5 inches, and I would cut the length, probably I was using the 20-inch length, and then I would cross cut them like this. Now the block here, let me find these white strips and show you one of the blocks. This is the block. So I have a six patch and then a rail. Now they're symmetrical. They're all the same. They were cut at 2 inches. They finish at 1.5 inches. So this is a 4.5-inch block. I really like how this worked. It is great for using up fabric. Oh my goodness. So you can make strips like this. You can use strip sets with longer pieces. You can do it like you would with a charm square and cut them into smaller squares and do that. For me, I use strip sets. I just did the strip set of 3 fabrics, and then I cross cut them. Now this you will remember. Let's see here. Let's take this one. So I would make a piece like this, and then we cut it in half. And now I'm going to take 2 more of these that are different, sew them down the side, and cut them in half. Does that sound familiar? There's a link down below in the description for you to download this PDF tutorial. It's a great quick reference, and it can sure come in handy. It also has the link where you can go to see this online on my website if you need further information. But make sure you get this. Now this is made out of 2.5-inch strips, so it is a bit larger, and the block is bigger than this. What did we say it was? 4.5 inches. And so this one is how wide? 6.5. So this finishes at 6 inches. And so it's the same thing. You know, you take your 2 pieces like this. You've got your strip set sewn, and you're going to put 2 together, and you're going to sew it this way, cut it down the middle just like that, and look at what you have. You have these wonderful 6 patches. Now, this is a perfect way to use up a lot of fabric and mix them. But you want to kind of set a common, whether it be a theme, a color, a design, something that carries you through, because this is a lot of stuff going on. I use florals. This is all florals. Everything in here is flower, and most everything has some pink in it. So that kind of helped tie all these blocks together. Look at how different. You wouldn't even know that's the same quilt. Here's the block right here. There's our block right there. And instead of doing it in the zigzag pattern, like the pink one, see the pink one's done in the zigzag. See how we get the points across there. This one is done again in that horizontal. Actually, it's vertical because it's the length of the fabric, or excuse me, the length of the quilt. But it doesn't matter. It kind of works out the same way depending on which way you hold the quilt. But this is another wonderful way to use up pieces. You can do charms, layer cakes, you can use your jelly rolls. Everything works together really well. But what we were talking about is mixing your design. What can go together? Florals. This worked really well. And the florals tie together and they blend together. I mostly used lighter backgrounds, but I did put in some of the darker ones too, just to get some contrast, so it makes it more interesting. Now, the big choice or decision here was the design. they're very graphic in nature, as opposed to, you know, this is floral, it's soft, it's organic, where these have some sharper images. And in this case, there was a lot of fish. So the dominant pattern in here, there's probably 4 or 5 different fabrics that have the fish on it. I did a little bit with some kind of round floral organic. This is like coral and things like that, leafy patterns. But then I used this other diamond graphic, and they all work really well together. But it would not work so well if I put in a bunch of florals mixing in with the graphics. So if you're going to go with a particular style, like florals or graphics or, you know, black and whites, whatever your case may be, you want to kind of carry over some similarities together that's going to make it look cohesive, and the finished piece is going to look spectacular when you do it that way. You're going to like it really, really well. Now, the one more quilt that I'm going to show you doesn't have that I don't want to say requirement, but even that recommendation. Because we have a lot of similar fabrics in this, I think I only used maybe 20-ish different fat quarters. A lot of them repeated, so I needed to be careful that I didn't repeat a lot of the same things too much. And that's what happened here. That was how the decision was made on this one. But the next one was everything goes. You can do anything you want, but there is still one common factor, and I'm going to show that to you right now. I love, love, love this quilt. Blue and white is just a great, great combination, but any bold, bright color against a white is going to be a strong contrast, and that's what makes this quilt so special. Number one is the contrast, and that really makes this pattern stand out. But the design element of it is that everything is blue. If everything is blue, you can combine everything that you want, from florals to graphics to florals to just organic. Look, we've got low volume. So this rail, instead of using just a white, this is actually a 9 patch, and I'm going to show you some of the individual blocks here in a minute. So where the other was a 6 patch with a white rail, this is actually a 9 patch. So this takes some dedication. This is a lot of fabric piecing, but it turned out fabulous. This is a wonderful, wonderful quilt. And I think when we did the final count, there were like 70 plus fabrics, different fabrics that are in here. And they're just wonderful. And there's so many other colors as well. Everything is blue, but we have, you know, some chartreusey, olive green, some pinks. I know there's some purples in here. There's lots of turquoise, just because that's one of my favorite blues. But look at all these great colors. And then the low volume, oh my goodness, that really allows for some great opportunity. And there are some fun prints, batik prints in low volume. So a quilt like this, look at what you can do. This is a fat quarter scrap buster. Any kind of fat quarter scrap you have, you're going to be able to make a quilt like this. Now let me show you these blocks, because this was a lot of fun to make. I had a lot of quilts, strips left over from other quilts from when I cut my fat quarters, and so I wanted to use them, and I wasn't sure what to do, and I thought, you know, I'm going to do some serious patchwork. And just like we did with the other quilt, you know, you take your pieces. We're going to start with the same thing, just like this. You take your pieces, and let's say these are 2 different ones. You sew it down the side, you cut it apart, and then you get this as your finished unit. And this is right here, okay? Do you see how that piece goes in? And then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to do this with your low volume, and instead you're going to cut them at the 2.5 inch, and they're just going to be added on right here. So you have these wonderful, wonderful blocks. And what I would try and do, you know, I forget how many are in this. It's a big quilt. I forget how many blocks, but when I would, you know, get a color going, I'd go, oh, this one I want to kind of get you know, a lot of maybe this lighter blue, or this one sort of went with some purples. So as it's going through, these blocks kind of carry a little bit of their own color against everything else. Just, you know, here we have some pink. So there's pink here and some pink there and a lighter blue. So that just casts a different look to that block as compared to being next to this one. So that's another fun idea as you're putting your blocks together, especially when you're using a lot of fabrics, is to consider what groups together, what goes well. And then we have our blocks. Let's see, what are we doing here? So this is our rail fence block here. Let's see, there it is. So we've got our rail fence here. This one will go like that, and then we're going to put this one here. And so you just start putting them together. Now obviously I've got this fabric 3 times, so I would probably just flip that over and, you know, move things around. Maybe that's the better choice to move. And, you know, just sort of get something going that you like and get all your fabrics and use them all together in a quilt. That's the key here. What can you put together to make a great quilt with what you already have? And you'll be amazed at what you can do. And the rail fence is a great option for that. So with all these different rail fence blocks and ideas and piecing and you know, different choices, I am hoping that you are going to be inspired to make a wonderful rail fence, whether it be a simple 2-rail from the beginning and just use light and darks. Make an entire quilt of the double rail lights and darks. That's a very common way to make that quilt, and it's also a great scrap buster. And you've just got some wonderful, wonderful options, and I hope that you found some great ideas here that you can use in your next quilt. So thanks so much for being here. It's been a pleasure, and I've had so much fun sharing this with you today.